I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility with leaders and innovators to make it all happen. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by Ed Olson, CEO and founder of May Mobility. On today's episode, we'll explore the multi-policy decision-making system that May Mobility built and how it's enabling them to scale globally. We hope you enjoy this episode. Ed, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be here.
It's great to have you. And first and foremost, thank you so much for last month for hosting me in Ann Arbor, for taking me to both of your facilities. Ed, I got to say, I walked away impressed. You've built this incredible organization with, let's call it a fraction or a micro fraction of capital that your peers in the industry have used. But yet you took me, it wasn't a video, we went in the ride, fully autonomous, no driver. How the heck are you pulling this off?
I think I have the unfair advantage of having been in this space for a long time. So dating back to DARPA Urban Challenge in 2007, I've been working on this ever since. And, the way that we built May is based on, well, as you know, the multi-policy decision-making, a very different way of thinking about building the technology stack. And it really is a reaction to how hard and how expensive it is to build an autonomous system in the traditional data-dependent way.
What were the origins of the MPDM? How did that come about, and what is that unlocking for May?
Yeah, the big challenge in the traditional sort of AI universe, and, as a recovering academic, a professor of artificial intelligence at the University of Michigan, I've built a lot of AI systems in my life. And like a lot of people, I believe that data was ultimately the way that you would win. The more data you collect, the better the model you can build, the more effective your system is going to be. And this has actually panned out in a lot of disciplines like speech recognition, game playing, protein folding, you name it. But for autonomous driving, the industry and even me in past lives has spent a lot of money trying to play the game of collecting all the data. And here's the fundamental problem in my mind. If you go into autonomous driving with the idea that you can catalog and index every possible scenario that the vehicle is going to encounter in the real world, you're going to fail. And so what you fundamentally need to do is you need to develop a technology that can handle unseen edge cases, situations that the vehicle has never been in before, the same way that a human can reason through a new situation they've never encountered before. And so that was a big bet 8 years ago when we started May Mobility that we could make this work. But here we are. We've shown that approaching the problem through that lens of not collecting all of the data, but building a system that can reason can get us to the finish line on a lot less capital.
When we were riding around, I asked you one of the edge cases that I thought a lot about that I learned with Voyage was the landscaping and the lawnmowers. You said, oh yeah, we solved that. And I was like, what? How did you get through that? Because sometimes, the lawnmower goes into the street and the vehicles to react. So that's an unseen edge case. How do you put the parameters in place in the MPDM to, let's say, react to a situation like that could happen, especially as we come into the spring and the summer in Ann Arbor?
Yeah, and solved is a big word, but I would say that we've made a ton of progress on those kinds of problems. And if you think about a traditional autonomous vehicle stack, they're usually based around trajectory forecasting. So at some point in your system, you're making a bet that you think pedestrian A is going to do this, and lawnmower B is going to do that. And then you pass that to your motion planner, and your motion planner is going to try to find a path through time and space that doesn't hit those things. Now, the problem with that approach is that if you're wrong about what those people are going to do, then you might plan to be in the place where they end up being. You might end up having a collision or an unsafe or an uncomfortable interaction. And this becomes a really big problem when you have an unusual situation, like a lawn care, someone doing lawn care who might back up unexpectedly or might move in unpredictable ways. So this is the fundamental challenge. If most AV approaches are very sensitive to mispredictions in their intent estimation, multi-policy decision-making is not nearly as sensitive. And the reason for this is that it's essentially, at its core, a Monte Carlo simulation system. So it's based on sampling all of the things that might happen and then planning in all of these universes in parallel. So we want to be safe whether the lawnmower backs up or whether the lawnmower goes straight. And that's what our system does. And it allows us to handle what is sometimes just inherently uncertain. We don't know what that guy is going to do next, but we can plan a path for the vehicle, plan a strategy for the vehicle that will be safe either way.
When you look at uncertainty, I'll give you an example. Today I'm driving and they're doing road construction, and the gentleman's holding a stop sign up, but yet he's putting his hands to wave to you, okay, it's fine, it's your turn to go. The vehicle had no idea what to go. How do you solve for something like that your vehicles will encounter, especially, and congratulations on the Lyft deal, when you scale in Atlanta, you might run into situations like that. How do the vehicles plan for that?
Yeah, there's a long list of situations that really do require today a human level capacity to understand. And so the challenge here is not to necessarily automate every aspect of it, but to automate the detection of those situations. So if the vehicle is driving down the street and it hears a siren from an ambulance or a fire truck, actually figuring out what to do next is really subtle. Sometimes the right thing to do is to pull over to the side of the road and to wait, if it's in your lane going the same direction, for example. But if it's on the next street over, or it's on the other side of a divided highway, the right thing might be to do nothing at all, just continue doing what you're doing. And so the key aspect here is to have the vehicle be able to detect that situation, to essentially be able to raise its hand, and at that point be able to say, this is the time when I need to have a human remotely support me through this and help me make the right decision. Same thing true if you've got someone standing in the street giving arm signals. That can be very, very complex. There's all kinds of context that humans use in body language and gesturing. The key thing is to get the vehicle to be able to detect that and be able to raise its hand and say, hey, I need the remote assistance to be helping me out in this situation.
And when part of our hour-long ride, we experienced that with the bus. It looked like it stopped incorrectly, and the vehicle took a very cautious yet assertive approach where it, I'll use an old school term, it ringed back to headquarters for what decision we do. Turns out we didn't need it because the bus moved out of the way, which I noticed your system was very, very cautious, but yet it was assertive at the same time. Why did you make it that way?
Yeah, a lot of this is that every AV that I've ever been in has sort of a personality, and it reflects in some degrees the philosophy of the team. But it can also reflect some of the technology choices. So, for example, our system is explicitly considering the many possibilities of things that might happen next. So if we're considering passing a car in front of us by going into the oncoming traffic lane, we are considering whether that oncoming traffic is going to accelerate, decelerate, turn out of the way, or whether a new car might appear out of a blind spot. And part of the challenge and opportunity here is if you can imagine all of the things that might happen, you can be prepared for the worst case scenario, which is great for safety. The consequence is that if you are always imagining the absolute worst case, then you're jumping at shadows. And so you want to balance those two factors, right? To be safe, to be proactive in minimizing risk to both yourself and other road users, but not paranoid at the same time. This is one where I see a difference in personality between Waymo and May. And the Waymo vehicles are great. Don't get me wrong. They drive really well. I enjoy riding them myself. But I'd say that they have generally a more trusting kind of flavor. If there's an oncoming car, they tend to trust that that car is not going to come across the center line, that if they're in the right turn lane, that they're going to make a right turn. And their vehicle will then behave, as a consequence, more confidently, assuming that those vehicles will do that. We tend to be a little more cynical. Maybe it's we live in Detroit. We see people make a lot of mistakes while driving. And so we tend to, when we have the data to back it up, we see people make mistakes all the time. And that is reflected in the probability estimates that we make for, what is that person actually going to do? They might be in the right turn lane, but what are they actually going to do? There's another tricky one too, that, if you've got a pedestrian and they're waiting on the side of the road and and you're sure that they want to cross, they might even have the right of way legally, but how often do you actually notice as a human that person is actually intending to cross behind you? They're like, go ahead. There's plenty of room behind you. I'm just going to cross behind you. And so the right thing to do there is to go ahead and accelerate and to pass through them. And so this is where we do a lot of work to try to track and estimate what that pedestrian's intention is. Do they want us to go, or do they want us to wait for them? And you don't want to end up in one of these standoffs where both people are waiting for each other, because then you both feel silly.
You feel silly, then the problem is then you get a viral video that goes and says your vehicles don't work. That's the bigger problem.
That too.
You're expanding this year. Curtis Hodge is working on it, which he said to me is going to be the largest deployment he's ever worked on. So I said to Curtis, who works for you, how large? Top secret. Come on, Curtis. All he tells me and that it's large. And you were kind when we had dinner at this really great barbecue restaurant in Ann Arbor, where you told me that you're going to operate in Atlanta. So Ed, I found myself in Atlanta last week, and I drove around. Boy, oh boy. Bad traffic. I think that's an underestimation. I would say horrible traffic. Interesting driving behavior. How are you preparing the MPDM for this not so nice driving environment in Atlanta is how I would describe it.
Well, the good news is that we've operated now without safety drivers in 3 cities. And so we've in total about 15 cities over the course of May Mobility across the United States, big cities, small cities, Japan as well. So, we feel like we have a lot of data, that our system has come a long ways. At the same time, we are not saying that we'll be able to handle absolutely every single thing that could ever possibly handle in Atlanta. Part of the advantage of launching with Lyft is that Lyft represents a fire hose of demand. And as the technology gets better, we'll have more ability to tap into that fire hose and reach out for rides that we can serve. So it's got to be a good match for where we operate and the the roads that we have validated and that we think are going to be a good rider experience. And the same thing's true for any AV system. So one of the things I like to do when I ride Waymo is I'll record the rides and I'll look at the trajectories. And one of the things you'll notice, especially even a year ago, that Waymo often does not take the most direct route between point A and point B. They are avoiding some roads in order to provide a better experience. We're going to do the same thing. But in this case, we have Lyft giving us a buffet menu, an all-you-can-eat buffet of trips for us to sample from. And anything that we don't want to take, we can hand off back to human drivers.
This ties directly into David Risher, the CEO of Lyft. He wrote a blog post I called his Autonomous Vehicle Manifesto, where he laid out the hybrid network, where you'll have human drivers and you'll have autonomous vehicles, and they'll complement each other like an elastic supply. If you give you the server thing there, is that one of the reasons why you chose Lyft, because of their hybrid approach that will allow you to scale, or how did the whole partnership come together with Lyft?
Yeah, I think if the alternative is that we go it alone as a ride-hail company like Waymo and it appears Zoox intend to do, that's really expensive. There's a large customer acquisition cost. We have to build and deploy an app. It's not rocket science, but it takes money. And then we would not have the ability to defer some rides back to a human-driven network. Those are pretty significant impediments to growing and scaling the business. And so in this case, I think, Lyft and May are really well aligned in terms of how this will roll out. I think the challenge, the fly in the ointment, so to speak, is that people are going to greatly prefer autonomous rides over human-driven rides. We already see that playing out in San Francisco, where Waymo has significantly captured market share away from Lyft and Uber. We know that people are willing to pay more for a Waymo ride, and they're willing to wait longer for a Waymo ride, which are clear signals that they just prefer the product. One of the challenges you have, I think, in ride-hail, in a human-driven model, is that you actually don't have a product. You have several million different products, and a rider never knows what product is going to show up when they request a ride. And sometimes we're not thrilled with the answer, right? It might be a car that's not clean, or a driver who is spending more time on the phone than driving, or any of a number of things can be unpleasant about that. But when you have an autonomous car, you're going to get a great driver every time. You're going to get a vehicle that is professionally managed and cared for and is clean. And you're going to get a vehicle that doesn't have anybody in it. So if you are, a crippling introvert like myself that is too shy to tell the driver that I'd really like to be heads down and just do my thing, or you just want to sing to the radio, like, you can do that in an autonomous car. Who cares? It's like your own personal bubble. That's something that I think a lot of people like.
Or You could play video games. You could play Nintendo in the car. You should put the May Mobility Nintendo games in the car. And you can build immersive experiences.
And you're exactly right, because one of the things you think about, the level of asset utilization in these vehicles, it's quite high. We can essentially justify a higher spend on in-car amenities for the rider, things that would not make sense in a personally owned vehicle. Like, you wouldn't put a high-end gaming station in your car because you're in it for, such a small fraction of the day. But in a vehicle that's getting close to 90% asset utilization, that's fine. That makes total sense. And you can add new capabilities to the new features, amenities to the rider.
I did some survey work on this, and one of the most interesting things that if you put this one feature in a vehicle, in Thomas vehicle, you would see outsized demand because of the cost. NFL Sunday ticket. I was shocked.
Oh, really?
If you put the NFL Sunday ticket in the vehicle and you allowed an individual to watch whatever football game they wanted, there would be a line out the door. And then I said to this one individual, he's like, I've been there 3-4 hours watching the whole game because I'm too cheap to buy the package, but I'll ride around in the vehicle. But it's just all those different incentives that go in. And an interesting thing, there was an article in the San Francisco Standard this week that families are taking their newborns home from the hospital in San Francisco in Waymos because they trust the Waymo driver more than the human driver. To me, that's this really interesting tipping point in society where you're putting your child's a couple days old and you're putting the trust to a robot. That's a major tipping point. What do you think of that major cultural tipping point?
I think it's absolutely going to happen. I think that, it's kind of funny because one of the reactions that I get a lot is, who's going to trust an autonomous vehicle? But then what you quickly find is exactly the opposite, that they get over the weird factor and they're like, no, actually, this is just better. You imagine if you were going to put I have two kids. I have a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. And, I can imagine sending them off to the movie theater in an autonomous vehicle, but I would think twice about putting them in a car with a stranger. So, I think there's a lot of opportunities that open up with autonomous vehicles because we can create such a safe and protected rider experience.
Yeah, I have an 11-year-old. I wouldn't put her in an Uber by herself, but in a Waymo or a May Mobility vehicle, yes, because it has, for one reason, that outside of all the safety, has dad mode. You try and reroute it to the boyfriend's house, boop, turn the vehicle around, come home, lock the doors. Now that's the best feature.
So what I'm hearing is we need the dad button, and then we need the please make the ride take 20 minutes more because there's more time in the fourth quarter, right?
Absolutely, but those are features that you can add. So you have deployments in Arlington, Texas. You have deployments in Ann Arbor. You're in Peachtree Corners, Georgia, which is down by the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. I believe you're 2 or 3 cities in Japan. Different cities, and then so America has one culture, Japan has another culture. Before we get into let's start with inside the vehicle, then we'll get to outside the vehicle. How do you adopt the experience inside the vehicle? When you took me, and you're just a beautiful screen, I understood it. Does that change for your deployments in Japan just based on cultural norms or different ways that the culture interacts with technology?
So right now, the user experience inside the vehicle is pretty similar across. That's mostly pragmatism more than what we think is necessarily optimal. We view our strength as really the make the car drive itself, provide a great rider experience, but then ultimately partnering with people on the ground who are going to know how to create a really optimized in-cabin experience.
Because you have 2 very large partners. You have NTT, for our audience know that's a very large Japanese telecom company, and obviously our whole audience knows Toyota. They're another one of your partners. So obviously they drive on the left-hand side of the road in Japan. The MPDM system was built in America to drive on the right-hand side. How do you adopt the MPDM system to drive on the left-hand side of the road?
Yeah, this is kind of surprising. The right-hand versus left-hand turns out to be trivial. So, we start off like every AV company with some maps. And so the vehicle follows the side of the road that the map prescribes for it. So that part is actually quite straightforward. The tricky part is actually the cultural differences in expectations. And I'll give you an example. So in the United States, let's imagine you have a 4-way stop. And you've got a pedestrian and a vehicle that have kind of arrived at the same time. What do? they sort of have a game of chicken. They're both sort of jockeying for position. It's like, I'm going to go as long as you're not going to run me over. And then it really is like one of those dynamic dances as you're figuring out whose turn it is to go. In Japan, pedestrians have their own way. Don't creep up on them. Don't nudge them. Don't be aggressive towards them. At least in Tokyo, when the pedestrian is in a crosswalk, they have the right of way. And so the question is, how do you modify your system to behave differently in a different market? And I think one of the biggest challenges with the traditional AI, go do everything with data, is that the answer is always the same answer. We got to go collect more data. We got to go train a bigger model. We're going to have to hire a bunch more smart people to curate, label, and manage this data set. But not only is this expensive up front, but now you end up with two models. You've got your San Francisco model and your Tokyo model. And by the way, then you're going to have your Paris model and your London model and probably your Miami model, because Miami is pretty different than San Francisco and Boston. This becomes an ongoing maintenance cost that's really going to slow down companies from expanding. What you really need is the ability to be able to make more contained changes. So for example, when we went to Tokyo, we very quickly noticed that our pedestrian models, the likelihood that our pedestrian models were making good predictions dropped. And that's basically because in Tokyo, pedestrians, when the light is green, they go. They don't hesitate. There's like, it's my turn, I'm going. I trust cars are going to wait for me. And at the same time, they tend to be more oblivious, right? So that when it is their green light, they also don't jaywalk, right? So they wait for the green, and when it is green, they just start walking across the intersection. Very different from Detroit pedestrians, who are more fearful for their life because there is no such thing as right of way. So what do you do? Well, in this case, we collected some more data and we updated our model for pedestrians in Tokyo. Very small, contained change. And now, in these simulations that our vehicle is doing, where it's imagining what's going to happen next, now we predict that the pedestrians are much less likely to jaywalk, which makes us more confident to drive through an intersection when it is our turn, and more deferential when it is not our turn. So we end up with this emergent consequence. We make a small change to the pedestrian model that changes what our simulations tell us, which changes the way that our vehicle behaves. We get a huge amount of free behavior by making a small focus change.
It's fascinating. So from a timeline perspective, from the day you put a vehicle on the ground to the day you were getting it operated, what does that timeline look like? How long does that take?
It depends on a lot of factors, including how many new capabilities are required, how different the driving culture is, if there are any other funny challenges. So for example, when we went to Japan, it was not just the new pedestrian model, but we also discovered that they have traffic signals that broke some of our basic assumptions about traffic signals. That, for example, we assumed that a traffic signal would have one lamp illuminated at any given time. It might have 3 lamps or 4 lamps or 5 lamps, but it'd be one light on at any given time. No, that's not true. In Japan, you can end up with multi-lights where multiple lamps will be lit at the same time. And so that was a hit your head against the table because, we had made some architectural assumptions that we had to go back and revisit and to build a new kind of traffic light detector. That obviously took more time for us to get around. But the one thing that we have seen in the long term is that the amount of time for us to learn a new environment is going down, and it's going down quickly. In Sun City, where we first operated without safety drivers, Sun City is very similar to Chandler, where Waymo first started driver-out operation. It took us 18 months from boots on the ground to remove safety drivers. We were in the, we're 99% there phase for about 12 months. That last 1% can be a real doozy. But we got there, and we were proud of it. Our second driver-out deployment, which actually is the one that you went on, from the time that we decided to turn that into a driver-out site to actually doing it, took about 6 months. And that was about a year later. So a year later, it took us a third of the time for a route that is more complicated. And then Peachtree Corners in Georgia, just outside of Atlanta, that took us 3 months from boots on the ground to commercially deployed with members of the general public. So I will say Peachtree Corners is a relatively small, it's not geographically large, so the mapping requirements were not that large. There weren't any new surprises, but that's also kind of the point, that as we accumulate this experience of operating in city after city, as we go to new cities, we're finding more often, oh, no surprises. We'll do our safety validation work, and then we're going to be good to go. So this is the exciting thing, that we now feel like we're at this point where we haven't solved autonomous driving, but we have gotten far enough along that curve where we're ready to start scaling much, much faster with partners like Lyft.
Are you able to do that because of going back to this, let's say the day one on May, you did the incorporation papers and you put your head down and you coded the MPDM? Is that becoming this, let's call it the secret sauce that's allowing you to scale efficiently and safely?
I think that is a huge piece of it. And, I think one maybe comical way of viewing MPDM is that MPDM, this reinforcement learning Monte Carlo-based simulation framework that we use, it was an act of desperation of someone who had built a traditional AV stack 4 times before and never gotten to the end of the edge cases. And so MPDM was the big bet that maybe there's a very different way of building the system. And we spent the next 6+ years just trying to solve some of the core engineering problems. Nobody knew if MPDM was really going to work. But now we've been able to show that, actually, it's not only works, but it works really well and it can scale very efficiently. So I think that's a huge piece. But I think there's another aspect too, which is that May has always been very focused on commercialization, unit economics, value proposition to customers. And it is really easy in the absence of a customer that's calling you up and complaining about the thing that they don't like about your service. It's very easy to end up in R&D mode, off implementing the features that are fun and exciting and intellectually challenging and stimulating, but not actually addressing the thing that matters the most to your customers. And if you aren't in the trenches actually working with customers, you are not turning on the fount of knowledge that they can provide to you about what actually matters. And this is something I think that May did right out of the gate. We had our first paying customer within 9 months of the founding of the company. And I'll tell you, 9 months into the company with 6 people, the vehicles were very simple. But we had our first paying customer, and that's been the ethos for us all along. What is the problem that we can solve? What's the right way to deploy this technology? What's the business model going to be? How much equipment can we put on the vehicle and hope to actually have a positive margin business? Those are questions that I think a lot of AV companies put off way too long and ended up building vehicles that might be technologically impressive, but are a long way away from being economically scalable and profitable.
I remember the early days in downtown Detroit. You ran the gems. And I remember that the little short routes. I think it was actually really, really short. If you had stops along the way, but I always give you credit because as long as I've known you, and I think probably one of your first or second press releases, you talked about the business case of May when you put out a statement into the market. Why have you always been so focused on May as a business, May as a business, May as a business, where you said some of your peers and competitors in the industry, let's go build the world's greatest toaster oven. But yet, hey, how are we going to commercialize it? No, it doesn't matter. We're going to build the world's greatest thing. But yet you were just sitting here like that children's book, The Little Engine That Could. You're like business, 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 revenue, revenue, revenue. I give you a lot of credit too early on when a lot of companies were raising large amounts of money and we saw where they went. You got government contracts, and everybody said, well, I don't know about May. And I said, well, what you don't understand about May? Government contracts don't default. It's not backed by venture. There's no calls. There's no LP calls. It's there and it's real. And look where it's gotten you today. It's gotten you this far and you're going further.
Yeah. In the B2G market, which has gotten us to this place, the revenue potential is really high. Municipalities spend a lot of money providing underwhelming bus service and across most of the United States. And it's not because they're not smart. It's that we have built our cities in this sprawling car-dependent way. And it is impossible to design a fixed route service that provides good service. It's impossible. But you can provide an effective on-demand microtransit system. And that's where we got our start. So in this model, we were both the fleet operator and the autonomy provider. And the app front end could have been ours, or could have been the city's, or could have been one of our partners. And we're very flexible on that. And it was a great way to build it. And you're also right. There are some advantages to the B2G. The revenue potential, as I mentioned, also very sticky. Also, the knowledge that we're doing right. We're helping make cities more beautiful, sustainable. But I guess the question that you started off with is, how did I get this way? Because I think superficially, a lot of people look at me and you're like, oh, he's an MIT PhD kind of guy. Then he was a faculty member. And then he was at Toyota Research Institute. This guy's an ivory tower guy. But it's actually, I mean, I've lived a couple different lives, but I think this is like startup 8 or 9 for me. I have always been really excited about commercialization. Like there's always been that nut rattling around in the back of my head, sure, do something cool, bring an innovative technology to market. For me, you got to. Like if you don't have an angle, then you don't have a moat. If you don't have some technological leverage, then you're wasting your time. You're just waiting for someone else to come along and do it better than you did. So I've always believed that you need to have a technology core. But technology by itself, without having a real world impact, is also a waste of time. And so that's always been very important to me. And so, I've been a founder a number of times. I've been an early employee even more times. I've always loved that phase of saying, yeah, we've got a bigger lever on this problem than anybody else. We can turn rusty bolts that nobody else can turn, and I can sell it. To me, that's great. And that's what May is all about.
It's awesome. And if you look at, in your early days, if you look at the United States, the market is for dial-a-ride. That's a whole business into itself. And the other thing I want to point out, when you take the government money, you're not diluting your shareholders. And so that's another really good positive thing there. So you have the MPDM technology at your core. You're operating a fixed service route in Arlington. Atlanta is going to go to dynamic. The next thing, so you have the partner with Lyft, and David Risher's been out there talking about Lyft-ready AVs are coming. He did an interview with Axios last week in DC, hyping it up more. They're preparing for a future with personally owned autonomous vehicles. Do you see a point through your partner Toyota, who's building the Sienna minivans for you, where MPDM could eventually one day power personally owned autonomous vehicles that Toyota could sell that could then go on the Lyft Ready network?
Wow, there's a lot in there. Okay, so first point, a little correction is that we haven't done fixed routes in years. So Arlington is all dynamically routed, all dynamically dispatched. So to the rider, it looks and feels like a Lyft or an Uber. You pull out your phone, you request a ride, vehicle comes to you, takes you directly to your destination. What's different about our past deployments and what's coming up in Atlanta is that with Atlanta, we are adding curb to curb booking. So it's going to be in our previous deployments, these were much more bus replacements. And so you'd pick off and drop off at essentially bus stop like locations. But now in Atlanta, we're moving to dynamic, essentially arbitrary routing, but it's always dynamically routed. So one quick correction. Where is this going? So we want to build a company that can scale really well. And there's 2 parts of deploying autonomous vehicles that are very hard to scale. One is building vehicles. And you can ask any of the companies that have gone down the path of building their own custom vehicles. Even for OEMs, building a new vehicle is a hard thing to do, much less for a startup. The other area that is very hard to scale is the operations game, the boots on the ground. How are you actually going to maintain hundreds of thousands of vehicles? Our strategy is to not do either of those, to do what we do really well, which is to build the autonomy as a service, a software subscription model that allows us to scale very rapidly. We're going to lean on Toyota and potentially other partners down the road, but Toyota is our biggest and best partner today. They can build vehicles like nobody else. We have a dedicated Toyota manufacturing capacity down the street where Toyota builds vehicles for us. And we're going to lean on fleet operators like Move and Transdev and Marubeni, like the companies that specialize in asset-heavy fleet operations who know how to do this. They're going to be able to scale that. They're going to do the stuff that we're not good at. We're going to do stuff that we're good at. And it's going to be a wildly scalable business model. So when we say that we can get to 10,000 vehicles, we know exactly how to do it. Like it amounts to us of, can we push 10,000 copies of our software out to vehicles that Toyota builds and someone else operates? And the answer is yes, of course we can. So here's the model. You've got Dave Risher, who says, I need 500 more vehicles in Los Angeles. Well, let me call up my favorite fleet provider and sign a contract with them to provide this additional capacity on my network. Well, so let's suppose it's Transdev, just to pick one. So Transdev says, great, we've got a huge opportunity here, but what vehicles are we going to use? Well, we like May's vehicles the best. So we're going to call up Toyota and we're going to order 500 vehicles from Toyota. Toyota's going to build them to the May spec. It's going to be a May SKU vehicle, ship them directly to the fleet operator. Then the fleet operator has us provision them over the air with software and maps. This is where the world is headed. And the beauty of this is that the economics of this business are fantastic. So today in the ride-hail business, there's about $2.28 of revenue potential per mile. And this gets sucked up by the cost of the demand aggregator, the Lyft or the Uber, and the owner, operator, contractor, driver. So Bob and his Hyundai, right? So Bob is both the driver and the fleet operator on the scale of one vehicle. And of course, there's a million Bobs out there. But the cost of delivering that 1 mile of service is about $2. So there's 28 cents of margin to distribute across Bob and the demand aggregator. You can make a pretty good business out of it, but it's not a great margin. It's like 10% margins. In the autonomous world, it costs us about 77 cents to provide the same mile of transportation. So instead of 28 cents of margin, there's about $1.25 of margin potential to go around, and a little more than that. Guys, subtraction in my head is hard. And everybody comes out ahead. So May Mobility now becomes the driver, but the Transdev or the fleet operator takes on the fleet operations. And they go from a business which is traditionally single-digit percentage margins to a business that has 40% margins for fleet operations. They love it. We love it because it's a 90% margin business for us. And there's actually more money on the table for the demand aggregator as well. We thought this was going to take several years to come together. But this is where we love the work that Waymo is doing, because they have shown the entire world at a scale that we wouldn't have had the cash to do, that the time is now. Everybody wants this now. They prefer the autonomous ride. And the best thing about Waymo is that most of the companies that we partner with ultimately see Waymo as a threat or competitor, not as a partner. And so they know they need an AV solution, and they know that it's not Waymo. Who's left? And so May has found itself within the last few months in pole position to be the number one provider of autonomous capability to everyone who views Waymo as a potential threat or competitor, which is almost everybody. It's been a great quarter for us. And the third thing you mentioned, sorry, you asked such a great question with so many layers. You asked about personally owned vehicles. And I think there will always be some market segment for personally owned vehicles. You got a contractor who needs to move his drywall stuff from job site to job site. Right? It doesn't make any sense to send a May Mobility minivan and have him move all of his tools out for every job. So there's always going to be that market. But I'll tell you, our goal is to primarily outcompete personal car ownership. Personally owned cars are a blight on cities. They are the ones that are congesting the streets and sucking up a huge amount of space due to parking. And so I view ultimately what we're doing as a way of outcompeting personal car ownership. We want to create a better experience so that when you are deciding how you're going to get from Novi or suburb downtown, you're going to say, why on earth would I drive myself? Why would I commit myself, whether the vehicle is autonomous or not, to an hour and a half of bumper to bumper traffic and all the stress that comes with that, when I could ride in a May Mobility vehicle and get to my destination faster? And in some cases, that's going to be door-to-door service if you're in sort of suburbs. In other cases, it's going to be by playing nice with public transit, where we get you to a mass transit station, and that whizzes you straight down through. There's no traffic. You essentially go through a time-traveling wormhole from the outskirts of town to downtown. You get there in a third of the time that you could have possibly gotten there on a freeway in your personally owned vehicle. Now we are outcompeting anything that a personally owned vehicle can do. And the thing is, a lot of people think that, isn't Toyota upset about this? No. Personally owned vehicles are not what makes Toyota or any OEM money. It's selling cars. And there is a huge latent demand for this transportation. If we can provide it, we will increase the total number of vehicle miles traveled. The more VMT there are, the more vehicles that we need. And so this is actually a way of growing the market. Now, we want to do it in a responsible way so that we're not just shunting thousands of more cars to downtown and adding to congestion. There's a right way to do this and a wrong way to do this. But this is actually a great growth opportunity for the OEMs too. And it makes our cities all better and more sustainable and safer for pedestrians, all of the things that we'd like for them to be. Sorry for the rant.
It's fantastic because let's be very honest. The OEMs are going to sell more vehicles because they're going to go into fleets. And then I learned about there's a little legal loophole. When you operate a service on a fleet, you're not subject to the TNC insurance, which is dramatically cheaper. 42% of your ride in Uber or Lyft in Los Angeles is insurance. That goes away when you operate a fleet model. That's fascinating. So then you take your math and you put another 42% margin on top of that, or let's just be generous and say, well, let's save 10% for insurance, so you 32%. That's a really big, impressive model. You're unlocking it from software. Your partner Toyota is selling more vehicles. Transdev happy because they're operating more. With the overarching question is, fleet management truly the way to unlock scale for autonomy?
In terms of I think that the fleets are the only way that makes sense. So, I think that you professionally managed vehicles, maybe the counterexample, I was trying to figure out, like, what's the alternative? Maybe the alternative is like the Elon version, where you're going to have privately owned vehicles that moonlight as autonomous vehicles to generate spare income. And I think this idea is madness. So, I think the reality is that if I owned a vehicle and then, I let it go moonlight as an autonomous vehicle. So not a fleet operated vehicle, but just, individual owners opting into this network. Then some days I'm going to go out to my car in the morning and it might not be there, or it might be messy, or it might smell bad, or I realize that I left my phone in the car and now it's not in the car. Like this is not a convenient thing. If someone who invests in a car for my own personal transportation, do I really want the, couple time a year inconvenience when I go out to the car and it's not suitable for me to drive? People are messy. Being a fleet operator is a business. I think this is one of the reasons that we see, how many people actually rent out on Airbnb their primary residence? No. Yeah, that's a terrible, terrible idea. What it's turned into is professionally managed property managers that do this as a business, because taking care of house guests is a business, not a side hustle. The other problem with the model is that the vehicle that I would want to own as a personally owned vehicle is not optimized very well for ride hail. So, for me, if let's suppose, I prefer leather seats, but I want a higher end audio system. I want a vehicle that meets my requirements. Do I want all of that in a vehicle that is a ride hail vehicle? No, that's just additional cost. That's additional exposure. It's additional maintenance. So if you're designing a vehicle for fleet operation, you're going to build a different vehicle. You might even put in a smaller battery pack, because I go on trips to my in-laws, which is, a 3-hour drive. I want to make sure I have the range capacity. But in a fleet optimized vehicle, I'm going to put in a smaller battery pack because I don't need the range, because I know that my vehicle can come back to the nest to recharge every 102 miles. So it's a different vehicle. So if you try to moonlight your personally owned vehicle, you are at an economic disadvantage versus companies that are buying vehicles that are optimized for that use case. And finally, if it actually is such an easy money-making opportunity, then why on earth do we need individual car buyers to finance this fleet? The BlackRocks of the world are perfectly happy to finance the assets for something that's a guaranteed moneymaker. And so I think that's just the biggest warning sign that somehow the math doesn't add up for personally owned vehicles moonlighting as autonomous cars. On
the BlackRock front, at some point, there's going to be a tax law change, and perhaps at some point, there could be a carve-out where you have REITs for real estate, you have for cell phone towers. Crown Castle's made a fortune that, and at some point, I'll say on the record, you're going to get autonomous vehicle REITs, where these REITs will operate and they'll be a publicly traded entity. Okay, so let's say 100,000, 200,000 vehicles in there, and they're going to pay you your coupon every month. That's coming. The other thing that's coming that I can't go, I would say a single day without somebody asking me this question, so I'm going to ask it to you. It's a very easy question because you and I talked about it at dinner, and I know you got a good answer for this. Highways. When is the great highway unlock coming for autonomous vehicles?
Yeah. So this comes up a lot, like at dinner, for example, over fried chicken. So So highways, first thing to know about highways is that from a complexity standpoint, highways are simpler than urban driving. You don't have people going in opposite directions. When people are maneuvering, they're essentially changing from one lane to the other. The one thing that is challenging about highways is the speed. And the faster you go, the farther you need to be able to see. And you can imagine that there's a sofa laying on the road. If you're going 30 miles an hour, you only need to be able to see that sofa out maybe 80 meters, 90 meters. If you're going twice as fast, at the same braking performance, you're going to need to be able to see substantially farther down the road. So higher speeds basically translates to higher sensor costs. Today, we have a vehicle that is very optimized for sensor costs. We have a positive margin business, especially when working with cities. And one of the ways we're able to achieve that is by not throwing in the kitchen sink. We have a sensor set that is optimized around the ODD, the problem that our customer actually has, not around the R&D problem of let's solve all the different flavors of autonomous driving. Now, I think what you find, the companies that do operate on freeways are generally the ones that have to. Like Aurora would be a good example. So trucking is one where if you can't drive on the freeways, you basically don't have a product. And so what they have done, Aurora is a great example, is that they have made a dedicated and focused investment in very long-range sensing. So like the acquisition of Blackmore LiDAR makes a ton of sense in the trucking sense, because this higher cost sensor, you can amortize that in over a truck that's going to have very high asset utilization, and where that truck, the cost of the truck itself isn't as sensitive as it is as the cost of a ride-hail vehicle is. But the cost of those sensors will come down, and as they do, we'll be the first to adopt them and add them to our vehicle when it makes economic sense to do so.
Those sensors are is that the only key, or are there other keys to unlocking a highway?
It's really the sensors, although there is a alternative path. So there is this version of the world where you can do most of the safety optically. So you can think about like the sofa on the road. There's sort of two ways to handle this. There's one where your LiDARs know that it's there, and at 200 meters. That's a really comfortable, high confidence way to do it. But as computer vision systems get better and better, maybe what you can do is reduce the requirements of your LiDAR, where maybe if you can see if your camera system failed to see it because it was a Wile E. Coyote, mirage, it looks like road, but it's actually a wall. What is the minimum distance at which you need a secondary sensor to detect the presence of that wall? And now instead of a comfortable braking, you can still have time for an emergency braking. And that sensor range is substantially shorter than the comfortable braking range. So if you can drive the quality of your optical only sensing system far enough out, then maybe you don't need the long range LiDAR to do it. Maybe you can get by with a shorter range LiDAR. But I think that thinking presumes that LiDAR is always expensive. And I don't see any reason why that would be the case, or why inherently a camera system, even if it's possible to do it all camera only, why that would be preferable. I can easily imagine a world not too long from now, let's say 2030, where the technology exists for us to do this purely camera only. But would you still be better off with a LiDAR? Maybe or radar. Does that improve your weather handling? Does that reduce your bill of materials cost? Now, cameras are cheap, but the GPUs to process camera data are expensive. So if the LiDAR can just give you the range data that otherwise requires a GPU to process it, maybe you come out ahead on bill of materials by having a multimodal system. And so, I think the jury is still out on what the most effective system would be. That a human can do it with optics only does not mean that the optimal answer is optics only. It just means that it's one possibility in the design space.
There's lots of possibilities. We know at some point highway driving is going to be solved. What stack's going to be used, that's yet to be determined. You're right about Aurora. They're on the highway. They're a highway business, and so that's why they got Blackmore. The sensor suites are going to change. Highway's going to be unlocked. May is going to scale. We know that for a fact, and I'm really excited to see Atlanta come online. I said to your Curtis, I said, I'm coming, buddy. You send me the invite when it's online. I'm flying up. And I said this earlier, Ed, I'm really proud of what you've built at May so far. In your opinion, what is the future of May mobility?
I think we are in pole position to be the number one provider of autonomy capability to companies that need it, and those that are afraid of Waymo as a threat or competitor. And I think that gives us the ability to scale. And today, we are a tiny little moat in comparison to Waymo's $25 billion of capital investment. But that will not be the case for very long. The scaling that we see in the near term through our partnerships with Lyft and others is going to catapult May into a very large company with a lot of revenue, and we'll be able to close the gaps that we have to Waymo today and come out the other side. It won't be a David versus Goliath story. We'll be two big companies with a lot of capabilities, and it'll be an exciting battle to duke out. But I also think that May Mobility brings in this sensibility of how do you deploy this technology in a way that makes cities better and more sustainable and more scalable. This view that we want to collaborate with public transit to help outcompete personal car ownership, to make cities less congested, to make it safer for pedestrians and bicyclists to walk downstairs, to make it more possible for cafes to spill out onto the sidewalks during the beautiful summer months. That is an achievable future. And it's one that we're ultimately excited about.
When you look at developing new technologies and you look at investing, Meta invested over $45 billion building the metaverse. Alphabet, Waymo, $25 billion. Meta spent more building the metaverse than Waymo. Alphabet spent building Waymo to date. To me, that's a really interesting statistic. And if you look at that, a fraction of a quarter of that you spent building May Mobility. Ed, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
I think the most important thing to know is that autonomy can really unlock a great future for us. It can be better accessibility to mobility for people who can't drive or shouldn't drive. It can mean that people don't need to buy cars. Today in the United States, to have an acceptable quality of life means having a car. And that is a huge financial burden for a lot of people. And so I think that this is a really exciting time. The last 20 years have been filled with promises delayed and underdelivered. But I think the next few years are going to be something really great.
They're going to be great. They're going to be fun because autonomy is real and it's scaling. Today is tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. The future is May Mobility. Ed, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
This is so fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today. Be sure to join us next week when we discuss robotics and machine learning with Blue River Technology and the future of farming.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.